HighBridge, a division of recorded books, presents Red Paint, the ancestral autobiography of a coast Salish punk, by Sasha LaPointe, read by Sasha LaPointe. For the women who came before me, and for Violet. Red Paint. If you look at the cedar,
Abil chuch, Lushootseed-Sasha,
you'll see how it bends.
Chuhwa shud aschal qui suk achil,
And doesn't break.
Gwil hui guasu huak.
And you have to learn how to be like the cedar.
Gwil yao chach lahaid aschal quad sas hoi, as ista atia chapai.
How to be flexible and pliable.
Aschal qui sas achil gwil as sapil.
And you yourself will not break.
Gwil hui qui guad su huak.
Violet Takshablu Hilbert.
Lushootseed translation, read by Jill Sasha LaPointe.
From Aunt Susie's Salmon Song. Transcribed and translated by Violet Takshablu Hilbert from Gwilquotsa, Aunt Susie Sampson Peter, The Wisdom of a Skagit Elder. I was sick. I was sick for a long time. Spiritually, supernaturally ill. For the entire salmon season, during all of the runs. We caught humpback salmon first. We killed them. Indeed, we killed them. As a consequence, it seems the salmon took me. They ran off with me, my soul. There I was sick. I was medicated, treated, yet I became progressively worse. It took place there on the Skagit River. There I lay for an indefinite time, until the salmon run finished. I became very thin. My stomach was compressed. No food was inside. I was skinny. When I would feel it, my face was only bone. Then I dreamed. I overheard talking. Oh, you folks had better return that human woman. You should return her to her human world. You, the one called Squai Saliwa, will return her. The leader with a great big canoe was thus identified. Many other people were on board, with their red paint and cedar bark headdresses on. I was traveling on the back of a salmon. That is how I was canoed. I was very afraid that I would fall off and drown. Then I overheard in song, "Unload her now, Squai Saliwa. You have arrived back in your land. You will disembark. You will say to your own grandmother, 'Open the door for me. I came back.' I walked upland. I knocked on the door. 'Open the door, grandmother. I have arrived.' But they said of me I was crazy. Confused, they said. Grandmother said, 'Get a grip on yourself, for you did not just arrive, my dear little one. You have instead always been here, asleep, continuously, and dreaming.'" Prologue. Winter Dances. We were a hunter-gatherer society. We were nomadic. We lived along the coasts and on the rivers. We moved with the water. We moved with the resources and followed the supply of fish. We picked berries and bracken root. We wove garments out of cedar and mats for sleeping out of cattail grass. Shellfish and salmon were important to us. We lived in cedar plank houses. We lived communally. And we held winter ceremonies. In the longhouse, people gathered. They built a great fire. They banished spirits in an opening ritual, and then they danced. They danced to the pounding of drums. On dirt floors, with bare feet, with smoke thick in the air, my ancestors danced until dawn broke. When the missionaries arrived, they banned the Coast Salish people's spiritual practices. So ceremonies went underground, and for the first time were held in secret. Treaties were passed, and eventually the Salish ancestral religion was given back to the people. But now it was something protected, something private. It is not my job to tell the story of what happens in the Longhouse. It would be considered disrespectful. My mother has taught me to behave a certain way, to honor and uphold our traditions and the wishes of my elders. We come from a long line of Salish medicine workers. We respect this. What happens in the Longhouse is not what this story is about, but this is a story about healing. This is a story about what I've learned from my ancestors. My ancestors participated in winter dances. They wore red paint. Hediu. There is a word that hangs next to the front door of my parents' home. Written on an index card in black ink, it reads, Hediu. It is the Lushootseed word for come in. It welcomes me. Every time I see the sign, I sound out the word and wonder if I am saying it wrong. Hudiu. I have never learned to speak our tribe's traditional language. On a rainy afternoon in midsummer, I walked up the road to visit my parents. I had a question to ask. I came to the door. The word and I had our ritual. Then I punched in the security code. 1492. Really, this is the code. Sometimes it's easier to remember the hard things. The year Columbus discovered America clicked the mechanism unlocking the front door and letting me into my family's home. I've often wished I understood the technology well enough to program 1491. It is a small house, small and old, and it has been in my family for generations. It sits on the large slope of a yard, on a hill that looks out toward Mount Tahoma, which, like my parents' lot combination, has also been colonized, renamed after a white admiral. Now this mountain is known as Mount Rainier. On some of the old maps of Tacoma, you can still see the lines that border this area of the east side, labeled Indian Allotment Land. This is the reservation. The river is polluted. There are no grocery stores in walking distance, but from the hill we can see downtown. We can look out at the Salish Sea. A white friend once told me he moved his family away from Tacoma because he wanted to have a garden. He wanted to teach his young son how to grow things, and he told me, "You can't do that here. The soil is bad." I made my way to the kitchen. My parents had renovated the house with new wood floors, sleek lighting fixtures, and updated cabinets. The house looked modern, but so many old things still filled the inside. I passed by the laundry room and thought of my ancestor, a woman called Aunt Susie. This part of the house used to be her bedroom. My parents told me that, as an old woman, during her last days, Aunt Susie often sat alone and told stories to herself in the traditional language. Whenever I walked by this part of the house, I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. Some houses are haunted by ghosts. Our house hangs on to words and stories. I found my parents in the dining room. My mom sat with a spread of language books laid out before her, a mosaic of traditional words and old photographs. She was planning the language conference. My dad looked up from his own book, and the two of them smiled at me. We made small talk, a recent poetry reading, the book I was working on, my siblings. My mom set a cup of coffee down in front of me and took her place next to my dad across the table. The room was quiet. I want to know if it is okay that I wear the red paint. I was cautious and slow in my asking. I knew that it was ceremony I was asking for, something sacred. My mom rose up from the table silently. Without a word, she disappeared downstairs as my dad sat quietly across from me. Naming ceremony. As I waited, my eyes wandered to the large cedarwood cabinet against the wall. I've known it since childhood. It used to stand in my great-grandmother's house, and it contained cedar baskets, carvings, and small talismans. I focused on the small doll on the second shelf, the Sasha doll. The doll had been gifted to my mother as a child. My grandmother had to special order it from a Swiss doll maker based in Germany. There were no Native American dolls when my mother was young, just Barbie dolls and baby dolls, blue-eyed and yellow-haired. But my grandmother had wanted her daughter to have a doll that resembled her. It was the only doll at the time with olive-toned skin, dark hair, and brown eyes, the perfect Indian baby, one my mother could hold truly as her own. Imprinted on the doll's back in bold letters was Sasha. This is how my mother named me. This doll was my first namesake. When I was a child, I was obsessed with the Sasha doll. I asked to take her to show and tell. I was proud of this strange girl, this relic whose name I bore. But I have always been a clumsy girl, and when I brought the doll to my first-grade show and tell, I dropped her on the pavement. When I picked her up, I saw her arm had broken off. I was beside myself with shock. I picked the pieces up and tried to shove the arm back into its delicate socket. I held the two pieces together with all my might, thinking they might magically fuse back together. I can fix you, I thought. I can fix you. To my horror, the doll had to be taken to the doll hospital to mend what had been broken. The doll doctor did what I could not and put her back together again. After she was fixed, the doll and I became estranged. I had failed her. With shame, I watched my mother take the doll back and put her on the shelf. I never touched her again. In addition to the Sasha doll, the shelf housed cedar baskets, paintings, and old photographs. One photograph in particular my mother had shown me before. It featured a woman in silver and sepia tone standing next to a river. She looked strong. She was proud and sturdy and beautiful. "This is your great-great-grandmother, Louise," my mother told me when I was 10. Your great-great-grandmother. Louise was my middle name. In contrast to the woman in the photograph, I was a pale, distractible thing. Surely there had been a mistake. You come from a long line of strength, my mother assured me. You carry it in your name. The very vessel that held all of these artifacts came from another woman whose name I carry. Louise's daughter, my great-grandmother, Violet Toxhablu Hilbert, gifted me her Skagit name. To be a namesake is a great responsibility. "You're my namesake, and you're going to do important things," she would say to me. There's a photograph of me at my naming ceremony. Small in a blue dress, mess of brown ringlets falling around my face as I teeter precariously close to the edge of a picnic table. The photo was taken in 1986. I am 3 years old. My arm is outstretched as if reaching for someone out of frame, and I'm smiling. I'd like to think it was my great-grandmother, just out of reach, coming to gather her namesake up in her arms, but there is no way of knowing. It could have been my mother. It could have been anybody. I have white socks with ruffles and strappy shoes. You can tell from the photo that my mother wanted me to look nice. You can also tell by the grin on my face that moments after the photo was taken, I would be barefoot, that my dress would be streaked in grass stains. When remembering that day, my mother sighs, laughs a little, and says, "I looked across the yard, saw you on the table dancing next to a boombox, and I just knew you were going to be a handful." That day, relatives passed me along in their arms. As uncles tended to the fire, as the salmon baked, friends and family tousled my hair, pinched my cheeks, and said things like, "Toxhablu number 2," and "What hard shoes to fill." I like to think my great-grandmother knew what she was doing that day, that she knew the counter-curse I would someday need. Like the fairy godmother in Sleeping Beauty, who saved her gift for last and passed to the sleeping princess the only thing that could wake her. As a child, I would long for what princesses possessed: magic, courage, enchanted slippers, and the love of brave princes. I would come to yearn for new worlds and ways to escape. What I wouldn't realize was the power that was bestowed upon me that day, the magic my great-grandmother passed down. And it wasn't true love's kiss. It wasn't a prince. It wasn't a spell or a slipper. It was a name. Toxhablu. Like an incantation. Toxhablu. It comes from deep in me, travels through parted lips out into the world and stays there. Linoleum. 3 years before I asked my parents about red paint, I was riding north with my boyfriend. It was my 30th birthday, and Brandon and I were driving up the interstate. I watched him drive. Brandon was classically handsome, tall with cropped dark hair and brown eyes. I had met him 9 years ago at a party. He walked in, and I remember thinking, damn, a real-life Agent Cooper. Agent Dale Cooper was the hero of my favorite TV show, Twin Peaks, a campy yet surreal series from my childhood that had a cult following. Created by David Lynch, the show was heavy with dark and supernatural themes, often terrifying, and along with Nirvana, responsible for putting this rainy corner of the Pacific Northwest on the map. I loved the show immediately. It was special to see Washington represented on screen, to recognize the dense forests and dark bodies of water where I grew up flickering back at me as I watched the show late into the night. The fictionalized town of Twin Peaks was meant to be somewhere near the Canadian border in the northernmost corner of Washington, basically positioning the town in my backyard or, at the very least, neighboring my small reservation. This was not the usual backdrop for a popular television series, and seeing the thick-knit sweaters, rainy skies, tall pine trees, logging trucks, and shitty diners made me feel at home. The show made me feel less invisible. There was even a predictable and stereotypical Native American character, Deputy Hawk. Hawk was the source of all the Indian mysticism in the show. He was, of course, a tracker. A turquoise earring dangled from one ear. He wore his dark hair long, and he knew the woods. Besides watching Dances with Wolves, this was the first time I had actually seen a real-life Indian character on the screen. It was Agent Cooper who had my heart, though. Cooper was an intuitive and mystic FBI agent, with transcendental dreams and an affinity for black coffee. Cooper ends up solving the mystery of a murdered high school girl, Laura Palmer, and frees her from the Black Lodge, an evil place that held her spirit captive. I have always wanted an Agent Cooper, and here I had found him in Brandon. Tall pine trees and the Cascade Mountains floated by beyond the window. I smiled. It was a good birthday. Brandon's parents were gone for the weekend, and we were heading north out of Seattle to take care of their plants and spend a quiet weekend alone. We lived in a collective house with friends. The drummer in Brandon's band and his girlfriend, a photographer I waited tables with. We loved the communal nature of our home, the parties, the bands crashing, the shared spaces always crowded with travelers. The weekend getaway felt special. It felt like playing house. I liked to sit at the fancy dining room table with matching dish sets and crystal glass. We walked our dog and read by the fireplace. Some part of me got a kick out of the normalcy. We drove north and I saw the landscape change. I watched the river snake through the valley alongside the interstate. When my great-grandmother was just a girl, she traveled up and down the river with her parents. They traveled by canoe on the Skagit River, her tribe's river. Her father was a fisherman, a logger, an Indian man who knew how to make his living off the river. In the summer, they would pick berries, and my great-grandmother would have to attend the Tulalip Indian boarding school during the berry season. When she told us about the constant moving around, my great-grandmother would smile, even when talking about sleeping in shacks and walls with no paint and dirt floors. My mother traveled with a rolled-up piece of linoleum, she'd recall warmly. No matter where we were, she'd lay it down. She'd create home wherever she could. My parents were also nomadic. We moved prompted by similar necessities. Money, jobs, a place to fit 5 kids. It just looked different. We lived in apartments and basements. I grew up used to impermanence. I grew up used to saying goodbye to places. When we moved into the trailer on the Swinomish Reservation, it was a temporary home. Something impermanent made out of aluminum and particle board, something without bones. Our first real plans for a home took shape on a plot of land in the dense woods of the reservation. We put our single-wide trailer on a relative's property while our lot across the street was being cleared. We were told to call him Uncle, though it was never clear if he was a blood relative or simply related to us in that Indian way. The land wasn't glamorous. There was a garbage pile that sank into the forest on the side of this uncle's double-wide, and a large red metal building where he smoked fish, a meadow behind the smokehouse, and our small, tinny, single-wide trailer scooted up against the tree line. "Just find ways to entertain yourselves," my parents would say to my siblings and me before disappearing to their long shifts. My dad worked late hours at the casino, and my mom commuted all the way to Seattle to keep her job there at the group home for Native youth. We became accustomed to late nights of movie rentals and frozen pizza, of games of Double Dare where me or one of my siblings would tear through the trails into the darkness of the woods with no flashlight just to see how far we could make it before we cried out. The woods of the fictional town of Twin Peaks were also ominous. Like my backyard, they were thick with tall trees, owls, and mysteries. Most of the townspeople of Twin Peaks feared the woods, but not my second favorite character. Audrey Horne didn't appear to be afraid of anything, and I loved her immediately. She's introduced as Agent Cooper's love interest and the daughter of a corrupt hotel owner, Benjamin Horne. 17-year-old Audrey Horne is dark, smart, and strange. She wears her black hair in a cropped bob, switches from her saddleback shoes to a pair of red pumps hidden in her locker, and smokes in the girls' room. Her father, a possible suspect in her classmate's murder, is a sleazy man, usually shrouded in cigar smoke and a bad suit. As part owner of One-Eyed Jack's, a casino and brothel on the other side of the Canadian border, Benjamin Horne has his hands in illegal gambling, underage prostitution, and drugs. Audrey falls for Cooper immediately, and it's not just because he's handsome. She sees the innate goodness within him. More importantly, she sees him as her ticket out. Audrey decides she wants to help Cooper solve the mystery, which leads her down a dangerous path of running away, going undercover, and eventually getting kidnapped at the very brothel her father owns. Keeping her identity hidden with a masquerade mask, Audrey is nearly assaulted by her father, a scene that made my stomach hurt and my chest tighten. Afterward, she runs to a phone. It's the only time you see Audrey in fear. She dials the number and with a shaky voice leaves a message. "Special Agent, why aren't you here?" I didn't grow up with a corrupt hotel owner as my father, but I was in danger. Our uncle was not rich and did not wear suits or smoke cigars, but he liked to party. On sunny days, he'd sit on the porch drinking cans of beer with his friends, while the kids went nuts in the front yard over the homemade slip-and-slide he made. He bought me my first two-piece bathing suit on such an afternoon when I complained I didn't have one. I was 10. I didn't want to go careening down a series of garbage bags lined with garden hoses and sprinklers in just my underpants. That was embarrassing. He went out for errands, returning with sodas, bags of Cool Ranch Doritos, and a lime green two-piece bathing suit. "Look at that," our uncle would laugh, and I'd hear the pop and hiss of a beer can being opened. "She's got a little bubble butt." Perhaps if another adult had been around, a sober one, my parents maybe, someone would have noticed. Someone could have warned me. But without someone there, I was left unattended, unprotected. After a night of babysitting, I fell asleep on our uncle's waterbed with his 3-year-old daughter. This wasn't unusual. The trailers were just a few short steps from each other. As kids, we learned to treat the space between like a hallway. As the credits to Disney's The Little Mermaid flickered against the yellowing walls of his bedroom, he stumbled in from the bar. The smell of beer on a lover's breath still bothers me. Not wine or whiskey or other spirits. It's the smell of beer that awakens some fear in me. The way it seeps out of the skin, permeates the breath. Sometimes I've had to ask a partner after a night out if they wouldn't mind brushing their teeth. I'm afraid of them seeing me break when they kiss me. After the night on the waterbed, I learned to run away. I wanted to find my own Agent Cooper. I cut my dark hair short and started wearing fire engine red lipstick. I slept in bowling alleys and on friends' couches. Once I even slept in an empty Petco under construction. A few friends and I hopped the fence, climbed a massive pile of wooden pallets, and slept until the gray light of morning crept in through the unfinished walls and woke us. That morning I met a boy in the parking lot, old enough to buy cigarettes and old enough to rent a hotel room. He was working on one of the buildings, probably the Petco, and said I could stay with him. I wanted a warm place to sleep. I wanted a bed and company. That night, I went with him back to his hotel room. Pink walls and an orange carpet dotted with old cigarette burns made up the landscape of the small room. The boy had a shaved head with a purple lock of hair that fell down over one side of his face and a nose ring. He popped beer cans open and chain-smoked, told me about bands and about living in Portland. Then he asked if he could see me undressed. I drank 2 beers back-to-back to work up the courage, then nervously slipped out of my clothes. My exposed body felt bare and vulnerable. This was my only currency. I stood there, 15 and shivering against a pale pink wall tinged yellow from years of cigarette smoke. I trembled a little and crawled into the hotel bed. The boy just looked at my body, ran his hands over it, and eventually passed out. In the morning, I left. I knew I needed to find something else. The hotel was not a home, and the boy was no special agent. I have always wanted a permanent home, a place to feel safe. The rooms I'd occupy as I grew into adulthood were always adorned with the relics I carried with me. A can of salmon gifted to me by my grandmother, stones, candles, a photograph of my mother and me. These things were my linoleum. Years after my teenage homelessness, I learned how to take care of myself. I learned to work, to pay bills, to pay rent. I even went to college. Still, I searched for a home. I searched for my special agent. I wanted some place I could truly call mine. I fell in love with Brandon from across a room at a party after a punk show. He was the most handsome man I had ever seen up close. He wasn't mean when he drank. He picked me up whenever I called, drew me baths, made me hot chocolate. I felt I had found my Agent Cooper. But like Audrey, I was doomed. I was a little bit broken, and I tried to hide that from him. I kept my secrets. I put on the red lips and an assumed fearlessness. I wanted to be the kind of girl Agent Cooper could fall for. And like Audrey's, my plan worked for a while. Brandon fell under my spell, and I believed I had found my home. On my 30th birthday, we drove up the highway and I looked out at the mountains and the fog and the trees. I knew that if we kept going, we would eventually hit the small town next to the reservation, then beyond that, the trailer, and finally, those dark woods. When we got to his parents' house that evening, Brandon made my favorite dinner, something I had grown up eating, smoked salmon and pasta with Alfredo sauce. As a kid, I thought this food was fancy. I didn't realize we ate it because pasta was cheap and we had smoked salmon in surplus. Still, this meal remained my favorite. After dinner, we sipped champagne. He brought out dessert, a chocolate ice cream cookie sandwich, and sitting on top was a diamond ring. I said yes. He had been my family, my home. He had been my something permanent. When I looked down at the ring, I was far away from basements, hotels, bowling alleys, and empty Petco buildings. I was far away from trailers and waterbeds. When I looked at that ring, I saw a home wherever I was. I saw my great-grandmother's linoleum. Spirit sickness. We spent the summer engaged, wondering how a wedding would work. At the time, I was attending the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. We decided I would fly back there, complete my undergraduate degree, and return the following summer. We'd get married on the solstice. That would give us the school year to plan. As my flight made its final descent, I spun the ring on my finger in slow circles, and I thought of the word wife. Is that an engagement ring? My friend Kaylee sat next to me in our Intro to Jewelry and Metals class. I was comically bad at making jewelry, but it was a good repose from the work I was doing in our nonfiction and poetry classes. It felt good to saw through things, hammer things, bend things, and watch things glow and change in the fire. Plus, our instructor was cool, looked like Nick Cave, and let us listen to Bikini.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?